Fnaf has its fair share of obscure animatronics, and one of those who surprisingly became a little more relevant as of Security Breach would be Mr. Hippo. Mr. Hippo was an animatronic initially introduced in Pizzeria Simulator. Part of the band The Mediocre Melodies, Mr. Hippo is grouped with the characters Happy Frog, Ned Bear, Pork Pocket, and Orville the Elephant. The whole group can be purchased as animatronics for the pizzeria and are pretty much middle-lower of the line options. Mr. Hippo sort of blends in with his bandmates in that game, having no real characterizations of his own. It isn't until the next one that he is featured in where he gets a character, a voice, and a gimmick. Returning in Ultimate Custom Night, Mr. Hippo is one of the animatronics who, alongside his bandmates, can crawl through the service vents and come and get you. Unlike his bandmates, however, Mr. Hippo has a specific gimmick. Instead of a voice line, Mr. Hippo has extremely long-winded stories that he tells upon you dying to him. Long drawn-out tangents about him and his friend Orville the Elephant feeding the ducks and talking about Arnold Palmer's and really just prattling along for an insatiable amount of time. I cannot stress how long these talking segments are, except to say that they are too long for me to have in full in this video. It would be nothing but him talking. This pretty much cemented Mr. Hippo's position as a joke character, but it wasn't followed through upon until Security Breach. Mr. Hippo is first referenced by the lame magnet that Gregory gets as a free gift at the beginning of the game, which he later uses to get the daycare pass. Both he and Freddy make it clear that they don't think highly of the magnet. Mr. Hippo is then seen in another joke where he replaces Glamrock Freddy after he takes off with Gregory in a van. Yes, Glamrock Mr. Hippo is technically canon in some Fnaf universe, but Security Breach's inclusion kind of doubled down on this joke of a character. Like how Toy Freddy was seen as some sort of joke, but then Ultimate Custom Night doubled down on him being a salty gamer who jump scares you if you don't play his game for him. It cemented that impression, and likewise, this kind of sealed Mr. Hippo's place as a comic relief. And because of this, everyone sort of forgets that behind Mr. Hippo's long, jokey commentaries was a very dark and tragic revelation. You're probably thinking I'm joking here, but I'm not. Mr. Hippo has 4 random tirades that he can go into. I'm not sure which one is technically first, but I think the way they're arranged on the wiki is correct in level of importance, so that's how I will go through them. Because they are so long, I'm going to give summaries of them and then play audio of the most important parts. Also, even though Orville doesn't talk in the stories or even mention Mr. Hippo in his lines, here's a line from him so you can get a feel for what his voice sounds like.
Now is my time to shine. I don't get out much, so you'll have to forgive my enthusiasm.
Very sweet, very charismatic. Reminds me of 2. Now then, the first story involves Mr. Hippo and Orville having a picnic. Mr. Hippo begins by telling Orville that he shouldn't read too much into stories. I know someone's going to say that this is a point that these stories were meaningless, but like The Scoop poking fun at people theorizing and saying the author will tell you when he wants to, it kind of comes off as inaccurate when your series is based off of your entire story being hidden in obscurity. But that's only part of the story. The climax, if you can call it that, involves Mr. Hippo suggesting that he gets Orville some rye bread because he's having trouble eating the sandwiches. He gets off on a tangent about a man who used to buy sourdough bread with his son and feed the ducks, except that Mr. Hippo hears that sourdough is bad for ducks. He then says something that I think might be notable here.
You know, I never saw any ducks die myself, but I did notice a substantial decrease in the duck population over the course of a few years. I just never thought to stop the man and tell him that he was killing the ducks by feeding them sourdough bread.
The story fizzles out a little later. What seems at first to be a ramble about bread is, but there's a brief glimpse of what might be a reference or at least a dark undertone in it. The second story does seem to be significantly more of a ramble. Mr. Hippo goes on about the importance of stories and how a story can just be a story, but how a story should hold some significance if you're drawing someone's attention to it. Which is likely a joke, seeing as though Mr. Hippo's story is a whole lot of fluff and not much else. Save for one thing, it is in the story that Mr. Hippo has a hiccup.
I believe it was summer. No, perhaps it was... Was it the fall? Yes. It was the fall because the leaves had turned already.
Mr. Hippo is getting his details a little mixed up. This will be important later. Mr. Hippo's third story is when things get a little more direct. Mr. Hippo and Orville are feeding birds, but the birds seem to be frozen. The two get in a who's on first routine about what's frozen, the birds or the breadcrumbs, back and forth until Mr. Hippo finally comes out and says that the birds might be dead.
So I said to Orville, and this is what I said to him, I said, Orville, the birds may be dead.
Then the story is over. Now, these 3 stories are pretty uneventful, but it is the last one that is the most important. After the beginning ramble, Mr. Hippo makes a few peculiar comments.
I was having a conversation with my friend Orville. We were, where were we? I think we were by the river. We were sitting by the river and watching the fish leap over the falls. And I said to Orville, you know, sometimes I feel like a fish leaping over and over again, always trying to get somewhere, though I don't know where, only to find myself in the jaws of a beast. He, of course, looked at me, surprised, you know. Have you been in the jaws of a beast, friend? To which I said, no, of course not, Orville.
Let me pause a moment. I don't know if these lines are supposed to be references. Likely they're not. But when I hear these lines, I think of events in Fnaf. Like, in the jaws of the beast naturally makes me think of the bite. Well, one of the bites at least. But this comment about jumping fish not really going anywhere, it sort of makes me think of Old Man Consequences, a character featured in Fnaf World initially, but returned in this game with a significant cutscene. Old Man Consequences sits at the edge of a red pond. If you go in too deep into the glitched world of Fnaf World, you find him, and he warns you that you are now stuck with him. He can also be summoned in Ultimate Custom Night, where you are dropped in beside him, hearing a strange warbling in the background. When fooling with the audio, you can hear Afton screaming from somewhere. Old Man Consequences assures you to leave the demon to his demons. It's so easy to get to that pond in this game. There's no glitching down to it. You just leave yourself alone with Old Man Consequences and you find yourself beside him, all while he's fishing in his little pond. Now, I'm not saying that this is hinting at some greater lore revelation. I'm just saying maybe Mr. Hippo is right. Maybe he and all his friends are just little fish trapped in a little pond. Either way, Mr. Hippo is saying that he feels trapped and unsafe. In the next line, he says this.
Life can seem like a relentless endeavor to overcome meaningless obstacles, only to meet an equally meaningless fate regardless of your efforts, regardless of the obstacles you've passed.
This could just be a direct reference to Ultimate Custom Night itself, where you're fighting more and more animatronics, but not getting anywhere fast. Mr. Hippo continues to talk about Orville comforting him with a picnic blanket and iced tea and lemonade, when he suddenly has this revelation.
You may be asking yourself, how did I go from sitting by the falls and drinking lemonade to being wedged in the air duct? Not only with Orville, but with an entire assortment of fruity-colored friends. Well, there's really no good answer to that, but perhaps I met a demise of my own at some point, and this is my afterlife or my dream, whatever it might mean. I honestly don't know. Or maybe it doesn't mean anything at all.
That last line is notable because when he says maybe it doesn't mean anything at all, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to assume that he's saying these stories are pointless. But they're not. In fact, the pointless part about these stories is Mr. Hippo and Orville. Maybe they're friends, but they're not buddies chilling by the river having picnics. Mr. Hippo is a deceased person trapped in a prison not of their own making. Mr. Hippo is not even Mr. Hippo. This is not a comical fourth wall break. This is a pretty upsetting revelation. But which one is it? Is it that Mr. Hippo might be remembering memories from his life but has confused people for his animatronic counterparts, thus remembering them wrong? Is Mr. Hippo remembering stories that are on brand for the mediocre melodies but didn't really happen? Ergo, why he suddenly realizes that he may remember that, but he is here and he doesn't know why? Is this a form of escapism, these stories he tells, that are constantly interrupted by reminders of death and the knowledge that he is trapped? To the point where they suddenly show up and derail the story, only for Mr. Hippo to jump back in and try to pull it back on the tracks? He changes the subject, he ends the story. In one case, he recounts Orville doing so, but then ventures back into the real elephant in the room afterwards. They're not on that river, they're here. Here's a notable line from Orville Elephant, by the way.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not going to let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here, no matter how many times they burn us.
He tried to release us, but I'm not going to let that happen. Mr. Hippo talks about lovely days in the park with his friend Orville, where they have picnics and chat and are under the sunshine and beside the river and are just happy. But he's stuck here with everyone else. All of these souls are trapped here like pawns, like toys, going through the same motions because someone's telling them to, punishing the person who killed them. Or at least that's what some of them think. There's some unanswered questions in Ultimate Custom Night. Like, who is the person who trapped them here, this so-called one you shouldn't have killed? Well, the truth is, that doesn't matter. It's a victim of Afton's turned monster, and like all the monsters Afton's created before it, it has managed to hurt others a lot more than it has ever hurt him. And the scary part is, we don't know what happens next. Do they do this forever? Are they let go and Afton eventually escapes? Was it someone else and they're stuck doing this forever and ever and ever? It doesn't matter, really. Mr. Hippo cannot move on. He can't go to the park, he can't sit with his friend and just talk, because even after death, he is stuck here being a tool. And worse, it's poisoning his memories, if these are memories. Happy memories of being at the park with someone, maybe his friend, maybe his father, are constantly interrupted with talk of death and moments of sudden realization that he's not there, but here. Maybe they're not even memories. Maybe they're just stories, in which case they're a direct way for him to escape. I know I'm supposed to be killing you, but how about instead I tell a tale so long that I get lost in it? And I know someone will say I'm overthinking it, but how can you overthink the story? Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions about Mr. Hippo's awareness or intentions, but everything about him being trapped there is true. It's concrete, it's real, it's not a theory, it's what we know happened. And it is very important. To make two comparisons, I've heard people say things like, Michael, Henry, and the puppet stories are over and that's why they're not around anymore. They all moved on and got their rest, and bringing them back would be a disservice. I partially agree with that, but I get where they're coming from. They want this happy ending for them. One exception, and that would be the huge swath of children's souls that are still trapped. They didn't rest, they're just trapped in the void. The other comparison would be to a plot point of Fazbear Frights. Spoiler alert, but at the end of Fazbear Frights, all the deceased children's souls aren't released. They're just trapped in memories that one person makes for them. That is absolutely terrifying to think about. That one kid just got lucky enough to be able to lord over all the other ones? What makes them so special? Because they're angrier than the others? If that's the case, Mr. Hippo's soul never had a chance to fight for himself. He barely realizes where he is. How could he ever push back against the one pulling their strings? Even if these are just jokes, that is a huge plot point creeping through the cracks. One that if you think a little too long on, you start to realize how dark it truly is. It doesn't matter how jokey Fnaf gets, these events still happen canonically in the story. Sister Location jokes about angsty teens and exotic butters, but 3 people are murdered and Michael Afton's life is ruined in a way that he can't ever escape. Pizzeria Simulator jokes about sending employees who know too much to an asylum. But yeah, that means Henry, who's pulling the strings in that game, was fully prepared to ruin some guy's life if he found his secret audio log that pretty much doesn't say anything incriminating. Security Breach constantly makes jokes, especially with the ditzy and goofy Freddy. 9 children have already died. I'm getting off track. The point of all this is somewhere along the lines of how characters might not be as cut and dry as they seem. Like how sinister undertones slip into Mr. Hippo's stories, looking deeper at this would-be one-off joke character wound up bringing up some uncomfortable questions pertaining to the bigger picture. I don't know. Maybe I took the bait. Maybe I read too much into the stories I was directly told not to. Maybe I'm thinking too hard about a plot point that, in the grand scheme of things, isn't vitally important to the future of Freddy's going forward. How I learned to stop worrying and love the Hippo. You still have to wonder if any of them ended up getting out. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But until then, thank you for watching.